welcome back to That Quirky Bird Girl. I am your host, Steph, and boy oh boy do I have an emotional one for you. I'll be dropping in pictures throughout this video of different Australian birds that are bright and that I used to help brighten my world up and brighten my brain up, really is what it was. I've been going back and forth, honestly, for a while about making this podcast episode, and part of me has doubted my ability to be able to talk about something that feels so deeply personal. And each time I have this doubt, I'm reminded by how supportive and kind and delicate my community here on Spotify, on TikTok, on YouTube has been towards my experience and allowing me the space to define it. I'm so appreciative of that. It's been really hard. And I sat down today to write about this podcast episode and to try to understand what it was that I would be talking about, because I'm kind of formulating it as I understand it, so it's vulnerable. And I might not, throughout this episode, have the words to describe what it is exactly that I'm feeling, or what it is exactly that triggers this for me, or allows me to see birds in the way that I do. But I feel it's important to start having that conversation. And so I want to share it with you all, but I can't promise that it's going to be clean. And I actually hope that this lands similar for you. You know, sometimes processing something new or trying to make sense of something new is going to be ugly, and it's not going to come out the way I want it to. And I'm becoming more and more okay with that, because there's always the opportunity for me to refine. I've changed so much over the past few months alone, and I trust that I will grow. And if what I say today doesn't necessarily align with how I feel about it in a few months, then I think that's okay. Those understandings and those thought processes were part of my experience getting to the ultimate understanding of where I will be at. So I'm accepting and letting go that I will change. And I'm hopeful that for you all as my audience, this releases some of that for you too, because oftentimes when we put something out into the universe, or when someone describes our experience so clearly and plainly, it can feel like that's what our experience always has to be. And I really relate to that. As someone who's neurodiverse, there's been a boom over the past 3 years of content creators that are ADHD, that are autistic, and often I've felt myself really relating to the content that they are creating. And then I find myself stuck in it because there are areas where I don't relate to that one person. And I feel like because I don't relate, it's wrong if I disconnect from what their words of advice are, or if I disconnect from what their experience is. But this is my attempt to tell you all that it is okay to have a different experience from me. If what I'm saying, anything of what I'm saying on this podcast episode does not resonate with what you feel, that's okay. And you will grow and, take what you will from what this podcast episode is. It's simply my experience, and I want to share it with you all and talk about how colors and birds have really helped me grow through my neurodivergent experience, because I've now posted a few podcast episodes about my neurodivergent experience and what it's been like with the birds. So y'all can go back and watch those episodes as a foundational one to this one. But in this episode, I'll be talking all about how I have shaped my worldview around birds, how they have helped me grow, and what role colors have played for me along the way in getting there. All of that being said, I'm really excited to be sharing more of my story, and as vulnerable and as hard as it is, I know that it's worth it. I look to my lives, and you all have been so vulnerable with me. You've shared your stories. You've shared where you're from. You've shared what you've been through. You've shared your difficulties. And I am so appreciative of that. I want to share some of that vulnerability with you all. Here we go. As you all know, I love to give you a chapter overview, so it wouldn't be a podcast episode if I didn't do that. So our chapter 1 is going to be all about stepping into my world. I'm going to set the scene a little bit for what it looks like to see birds through my eyes or lens, so to speak. Chapter 2, we'll be walking through an exercise where I will prompt you all, and don't do this if you're driving, please, but I will prompt you through some imagination, some colorization of birds through my lens. So I'll be asking you to close your eyes, and we're just going to go through a fun little exercise together to help you get closer to what it is that I experience with the birds and through the birds. Chapter 1 is the introduction, my friends. I talked about in the last podcast episodes about how birds were present through everything. They were present at every big moment of my life, at every moment of grief, of loss, of excitement, and it wasn't necessarily terribly direct. And I'll get into what I mean by that in just one second. Starting so young with birds and seeing birds, but not necessarily engaging with the birds outside, I was a bookworm. And not necessarily in the way that you would think of today. I was a child bookworm. I had my head in this encyclopedia for hours. Like I would open up this book. It was an Australian encyclopedia, and they had Tasmanian devils as well, which I also love. And they're all black for those of you that haven't seen them. So they sort of recognized and emphasized darker emotions for me. But the other side of emotions, which were the lighter ones, which were the ones that I felt like I always, literally from birth, had trouble expressing, those were the ones that birds helped me through. It was easy for me at one point in time when I was much younger to express my anger and my frustration, because I was able to identify that directly with the Tasmanian devil. And the Tasmanian devil's literally devil. I grew up in the church, it was easy. And oftentimes, like with the church that I grew up in particular, expressing the negative emotions was crystal clear. That was easy because there was so much anger around me and frustration and upset. And so those emotions were easier. But the ones that dealt with happier, more positive experiences, I had to find a way for me to express them. And at this point in time, all the way up until age 6, I wasn't able to express myself with words. I had to use external sources. So I would pull from things like books. I would repeat same things over and over again. For those of you that aren't familiar with echolalia, that is something that I would do. So it's not necessarily that I wasn't producing speech and that I wasn't speaking. I was speaking in the same way that I was using colors but it just looked completely different from what other people around me expected, wanted, needed, all of that. So it was really hard for me. And I had to figure out this way to express myself when there was literally no way of expressing myself in the system that was literally built around me. So I turned to birds. And I had this encyclopedia already that I loved deeply, and I would basically open it and I would just scroll through. And this encyclopedia, not only did it have a categorization of so many different birds, but it also broke down and opened up into these like tri-fold pages that I could literally crack open and just see the beautiful, stunning array of colors and a stack of words that I had no idea what meant at the time. All I cared about was the colors. But expressing those colors, thinking about those colors, up until that point, probably about when I was 4 years old, I would look around and everything was dark because that was my worldview. I had spent time looking at this Tasmanian devil. I grew up in the church. There were so many areas that felt dark all around me. But finding lighter colors and painting lighter colors in my brain, that would be a completely new process. And not to go unspoken, it was incredibly difficult to live a world that is that dark at that age. And in addition to that, I had a new sibling who, required a lot. Admittedly, my brother needed a lot of attention, and boy, oh boy, did he get it. I love my brother so much to this day, but things certainly changed. I needed more attention as a kid, and I just couldn't get it. It just wasn't available. So my worldview was dark. It was really, really, really dark. And I was able to find something that made it slightly brighter. When I would sit in art class, even when I was older, because I still struggled, and honestly, to this day, struggle with bringing those brighter colors unless there is a catalyst. I would sit in art class and I would paint these like practically black paintings. They were black and orange and dark brown. And that would literally be what I would see in my mind because I would see in colors. I'm not seeing in words. I'm not seeing in objects unless there is a particular catalyst or something that is bringing it to my mind. I'm not seeing anything but colors. And so for me, it was so dark and I was able to turn to this encyclopedia. And again, it was Australian birds. For those of you that aren't familiar with Australian birds, they are so, so bright. I'll be dropping in pictures throughout this video of different Australian birds that are bright and that I used to help brighten my world up and brighten my brain up, really is what it was. So I started using this trifold page of different bird colors, bright greens, bright blues, bright purples, bright oranges, bright yellows, bright greens, to trickle in between the dark browns, the grays, the blacks that I was seeing and help bring to life some of what I wanted to actually be experiencing, because I was a sad kid by default. I wasn't a sad kid just because that came to me. I was a sad kid because there was so much darkness and suffering. And I mentioned the church earlier, but just the church speaking about people in such a negative light. It felt like there wasn't anyone around me that was speaking brightness or positivity or beauty or excitement into existence. It just felt like everything was like a constant battle and everyone was upset and not happy with it being a constant battle. And for someone who wanted to be so happy but felt so trapped in the darkness and literally trapped in the darkness of my mind too. It's not just like in the external environment. What I saw externally became my internal. And the only thing that I could do was find something that could change my internal experience, because as I grew older, it did not get easier. It only got more and more difficult and things got darker and darker that I had to deal with. And at that point, I started seeing it as my choice to be able to release myself from these environments that were causing me more darkness, which is the way that I perceived it. I thought at the time, and honestly, I still struggle with this thought a lot, that it is my responsibility or it's within my control to change the circumstances around me. And oftentimes that is true, like clinging on to what it is that we can control to change the external. The thing is, though, at the end of the day, if something is dark and ugly around us, unfortunately, we can't 100% change the circumstances in which I grew up in. You know, I couldn't change that in just a few short years, my parents would get divorced and I would end up losing access to my encyclopedia. And all of those bright colors would just become a memory that became over time more and more difficult to cling on to. It was hard. It is so, so, so hard to be a child of parents who got divorced. And I don't think people talk about it enough. We think about the moment of divorce being something that happens later on. Like, okay, before I was 9 years old, my parents weren't divorced. But when I was 9 years old, that's when things changed. That's when the divorce happened. That's when the actual separation, the physical, and what you could see externally started to change. But what you saw internally, if you were to come into my house, the divorce was happening all along. It was never not happening. And so to live a life where externally that is the marker where things changed, no one really talks about the internal that was happening long before that you had to go through and experience, and seeing people fight all of the time, seeing people be angry all of the time. You know, I read this book as a kid that was called I So Mad, and I would just say that over and over and over and over again. And at one point in time, it felt like it was helping me relieve some of the trapped emotions that other people had relayed onto me. And birds were my escape until my escape no longer could exist. I simply had no control over my environment. Even if I wanted to find control, and even if I wanted to go out and seek purchasing a new bird book or spending time outside with the birds, where was I going to go? There was nowhere to go. I go to the river out behind my house, and I would sit by it and just watch the water flow. But that was the closest thing that I could get to birds. I would see fish and hang out with them. But again, this is all dark. Like, it was a dark river. The water was murky. Like around me was just all of this darkness, and the only light that I got to experience was through birds. And I recognized that so early on. And it's why throughout my whole entire life, I have felt this like circular motion and pattern of darkness, come back to the birds, darkness, come back to the birds, darkness, come back to the birds. And it's always been like that for me. And I know that there are so many people that have related to me saying that and to sharing this message. And if you relate to something that you've come back to over and over and over again, whether it be Pokemon, whether it be Yu-Gi-Oh, whether it be aquatic life, I want to tell you that it is okay to come back to that. There is a level of grief that happens when you return back to something that you have been avoiding. And the releasing of that and telling yourself, it's okay to return back to this thing, even though I'm much older. I should have done it earlier. I should have done this. I should have done that. This person did it sooner. I didn't do it on time. All of these things and these ideas that build up within us, they're incredibly difficult to process. And it's okay if you come back to something only when you need it and only when it works for you. I encourage you to continue doing that because it'll only strengthen your bond. The only times that birds have been able to help me is when I let them help me, is when I release and let go and just say, you know what, the experience is going to be what they make it. And they're going to help me in the way that I know I need. I'm directing it. I'm the director at the end of the day, but they're guiding me. And so now I'm going to get into what that actually looked like for me at age 4. So now we know that there is a bunch of darkness around my childhood, and I laugh because that's uncomfortable to say, right? It's uncomfortable to sit with. To acknowledge that you didn't have the childhood that you wanted or needed, that's a difficult realization. And I struggle with it so much. I don't know when I'll stop struggling with it, but I'm going to struggle through it in this episode. So take a deep breath with me and we will get through this together. So how did I see the colors of different birds in my mind? Well, basically what I would do is I would sit down in front of those pages, in front of those trifold pages, and I would just let myself be for the first time, probably the only time. And if I felt anger, I looked at a bright red bird. If I felt excitement because I looked at a bright red bird and now I'm excited because this bright red bird is stunning, then I would go look at a bright green bird and I would get excited because of this bright green bird. And then I'm feeling excitement. Now I'm feeling joy. So I look at a bright blue bird. And it's this catalyst of experiencing emotions. And I would just hop around the pages feeling different things and allowing myself to sit with that feeling just by looking at these birds and scrolling through the pages. It was the first time where I felt like I was fully and totally releasing and just letting the birds guide me through my own emotional experience. And so that is the birth of all of this, really, of my content, of my love for birds. It was truly my experience of just letting go. And it's terrifying. I don't remember what I was feeling in the moment when I was so young and just sitting there scrolling through the pages. All I remember is that it made me feel. And those were the emotions, or are the emotions today, that I associate with those colors. So in scrolling through them and acknowledging them, I'm able to relive some of those experiences as a kid. And it's fascinating. It's so exciting for me to relive because it reminds me that I can bring myself back to that version of myself, that little kid that loves birds so enthusiastically and doesn't care what anyone else thinks about what it looks like to love birds this much. I mean, I could drop facts upon facts upon facts about birds and it's all I want to talk about. But I oftentimes don't even let myself get there. I don't let myself get there. And I don't know why. Sometimes I have my own personal block and I'm working on it, but it's hard. And coming back to moments like these where I think about just letting go in front of the birds and it being a safe space where I literally created my own system in my mind of colors to express those emotions really helps me. So I started connecting colors to birds and birds to emotions. From that point, it was basically this massive launch site where I could literally, away from those pages, experience those emotions as long as I brought those colors up in my head. And as I got older, I didn't start art class until I was probably 6 or 7. But as I got older, my paintings started to get brighter and brighter and more colors started to trickle in. And the only thing that I can equate that to is getting more comfortable with the birds and letting go and letting the experience of the birds carry me through my joy, through my excitement, through my happiness, through all of those changes that I didn't even think would be possible if I didn't let the birds just let me have them. I see colors today the same way that I saw them back then. I see them through birds, and I genuinely hope that that never, ever changes for me. And I hope that you feel inspired to see birds in a similar way. It doesn't have to be through colors, but finding something that works with you or for you to help unlock those emotions or those feelings or those experiences that allow you to connect to the younger version of yourself. Because this work that I've been doing on myself and reconnecting and regrounding myself into who I am, who I know I am, has been so reassuring and fulfilling. And it's also enabled me to get closer to the community that I have right here on this podcast, on my Patreon, and allow you all to see a different side of me that I haven't even been comfortable enough to show to myself. Like, that is what you all have done for me. And I can't say thank you enough for enabling me, for challenging me, for questioning things, for just everything. I'm so appreciative. And we're going to grow this platform into something that is so big and does such important, monumental work for other people that really need help. Birds are such a big differentiator for me and my life and my own mental health. If I didn't have birds, I don't know that I would be as resilient as I am today. Seeing bird colors allows me to reframe things. It genuinely does. I'll get into that more in chapter 4. But it really helps me in grounding and understanding what it is that I need from other people and what I need from myself through examination of my own emotions because of bird colors. What? It's so amazing. So that is some of stepping into my world and seeing the colors. Now it is time to dive into chapter 2. And this is an exercise on how you actually unlock this ability or start seeing some of this for yourself, because you too are deserving of this. And I hope that it helps you feel a little feelings, and we can do it together. You're not alone. So yeah. So together, we're going to take a moment to just take a deep breath together. All of this starts from being a little bit in our mind, a little bit in our body, and that's breath work. You know, maybe you're someone like me, you notice after a minute, hey, I haven't taken a single breath this whole entire time. I do that a lot. So let's do it together. Okay. Thank you so much. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is close your eyes with me, and I want you to just relax your mind. Now, there are different types of thinkers, so this is going to work differently for you as it is going to work differently for me. But I want to try and show y'all what the world looks like for me. And if you don't get it right, if you feel like you're not connecting with the way that I see the world, that's completely okay. It's your different worldview. Just let it be and let your mind take it to where it works for you. It doesn't have to be 100% aligned with what I describe. Okay. So, like I said, go ahead and close your eyes. I want you to imagine just your worldview. Imagine a day-to-day. Imagine waking up bright and early in the morning. What's the first color or sentence or image that you see when you first wake up? And then I want you to name that. I want you to say, is that positive? Is it negative? Identify an emotion with it. Is it maybe frustration? This morning I woke up annoyed already. And so for me, annoyance would be red. So I'm picturing a red, and then I would associate that with a red bird, but that's getting ahead of myself. So just stick with me on the initial of what you're seeing in the morning. So for myself, I'll paint the picture of this morning. I woke up and I was feeling really annoyed already. And I was seeing red, and I couldn't help but just close my eyes again and say, you know what? I can't necessarily deal with this right now. Whether or not you had that same process or you leaned into it, what is that for you? You can pause this if you need a few seconds to figure out what that is, and then come back to me when you're ready. But I'll be diving into the next part right now. So the next part is associating that with something. You already know what it is that you're seeing, but maybe like me, you're seeing red, or maybe not like me. Maybe you see a green. Maybe that means happiness or excitement, or well, maybe you're seeing a sentence and that means excitement and thrill. You woke up excited for something, maybe because it's a Friday, because I'm filming this on a Friday. It could be whatever it is that you want it to be. For me, though, it was annoyance, and I was seeing red, so I'm going to name a bright red bird, and I'll say the vermilion flycatcher, the male specifically. And oftentimes I'll just sit with this bird and I'll let it be there, hop around on a tree. For me, these birds are migratory, so they're, checking out a new circumstance, they're exploring, they're finding different ways to see solutions, maybe they're being inventive and creative. If for you, you're seeing bright green, maybe you're seeing a monk parakeet and identifying their ability to change different environments constantly. And while they may be considered an invasive bird, they're also a bird that people keep in their homes. They're also a bird that if you go down to Argentina, you can see them everywhere. But if you come up to Brooklyn here in New York, you can see them too. There are so many opportunities for seeing these birds. So I want you to name a bird, name an experience, name a spider, an aquatic life, whatever it is for you, but identify something with that thought and feeling. Connect it to something else that's external to you, that maybe, just maybe, and maybe not yet, it's okay if not yet too, but maybe you can relate to it. So with my vermilion flycatcher, what I will often do is I'll ask myself a few questions. I'll sit with the vermilion flycatcher and I'll ask it, what is it going to do today? What is it going to explore today? And how does it balance feeling this emotion, this beauty, which is this bright red color, with also the feelings of maybe some frustration? Being a migratory bird, it's not easy. They have to travel as far down south to Argentina and make their way all the way up to the United States. That's a long trek. And I'm sure they don't come across many kind birds of prey. Things aren't easy for them. And maybe this morning things weren't easy for me either. And I can relate to that. I can relate to some of their journey. I've taken a really hard road and I've made amazing choices along the way, but that doesn't mean they were easy choices for me to make. I still made them, just like the vermilion flycatcher. The vermilion flycatcher also, because they're migratory, they have to be very curious. They have to ask questions that are important to them and important to the people around them. So what am I doing today to ask questions about this feeling? What am I doing today to ask questions about what my surroundings are, or who I'm talking to, or how I'm showing up as, or am I being the most real version of myself and not making myself a duller version of this bright red bird? All of these are questions that I go through to help get me to a place where I feel like I can get up and live through the emotion of being annoyed. Because admittedly, these darker emotions, feelings of depression, feelings of sadness, of loss, they can lock us into feeling those and making us think that we have to feel them forever. But birds, for me, have been able to show me that there's a different world out there. And regardless of whether or not I have to create it for myself, it's out there for me. I just have to believe that it's out there. So birds give me hope in believing that it's out there. And say tomorrow I wake up and I'm seeing bright green, then I can close my eyes and I can see a mallard, a male mallard. And it is the height of mating season. And he is so excited to just spread his little seed. And maybe my seed, so to speak, and this is kind of a funny analogy, is my ability to share my experience. So I can sit and ask myself, what am I doing today to share my experience with other people? And how am I uplifting others and making sure that my experience isn't just mine alone, that I'm moving along with people and I'm growing and I'm changing, and just like nature, just like the trees, as we get closer and closer to spring and they let those leaves burst out and fly, how am I going to burst out and fly? And having questions like these and engaging yourself is so, so exciting. And it's really hard. And I'm not going to say it's easy either, because this morning when I was sitting, all I wanted to do was be freaking annoyed. I wanted to be so annoyed at what I was going through and how I woke up and how I went to sleep and what I did the day before. I just wanted to be annoyed, full stop. But the birds don't always let me be fully annoyed. They give me hope. They give me strength. They give me the power to move forward and to recognize a different future for myself than one that I thought literally could even exist. because oftentimes that's the thing. I don't think sometimes that there is a different world, but the birds, every time I allow myself to sit in that moment, see the color, see the bird, and see the questions. I mean, not necessarily see the questions, but ponder and sit with the questions, it allows me to just be more present and be more myself than I literally ever have been in my whole entire life. That is our exercise. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below. I will also be posting a few other exercises over on my Patreon, so if you haven't checked that out, be sure to check it out. I have it up as free for right now, but it won't always be. Once I hit a certain number of followers, I'll be switching it from free to paid only. So if you want to get into my community, get in now before that happens. Let me know what you thought of this podcast episode, and I will be back for much, much more. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out my link tree in the bio of this page, and I will see you all very, very soon. Thank you so, so much.